Call the Development Committee meeting of April 18th to order. Roll call, please.
Member Krajewski. Member Chaplin. Here. Member Guston. Here. Member Ozog. Member Rutledge. Here. Chair Tori.
Here. We have a quorum. We went to public comment. Public comment is limited to 30 minutes, 3 minutes per public comment. There is no new evidence that's to be presented. We have one person here for public comment. Dan Geary.
Morning, board. My name is Dan Geary. I reside in Winfield here across the street. And I'm here to talk about the two structures that, or the one structure that is trying to be built with your permission and vote. So number one is a detached garage, just to store regular things that you put in the garage, patio furniture, garden implements, which the second one would be a lean-to structure, which would be a patio, which would be adjacent to the pool that we have in our yard. So that would be recreational. It's just my wife and I at the residence with family visiting from Western Pennsylvania a few times a year. And it would be screened in from floor to the rafter. So it would not be 4 complete walls. It's just a screened in. And there are a few points I'd like to address just regarding the concerns around adequate supply of light and air. The nearest structure to our house is over 100 feet away. And if there's any concerns there, I'm happy to approach that. With the increase of danger from fire, it's an open air patio with furniture. And we'd be happy to accommodate in any way possible that is up to code for fire and diminishing land value. It's our desire to make sure that our neighborhood and our town looks as pretty as possible. So this is being completed instead of a shed or a canopy for the car to actually make it a finished structure. And then if there were any other concerns around traffic, congestion, or flood, I don't see that that's applicable, but I'm happy to hear or have any conversation around that. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dan. It concludes the public comment portion of the meeting. I will entertain a motion to amend the agenda to pull items 6A and B. They are
So moved.
not ready for movement this morning. There's a motion, a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The items are pulled. Moving on to minutes, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of March 21st, 2023.
So moved. Second.
Any additions, corrections, or deletions? Hearing none, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. And moving on to item 6C, I'll entertain a motion to approve DCO 21-23, zoning 2315 Gary. This is a zoning hearing officer's recommendation to bifurcate. One, a zoning hearing officer's recommendation to approve a variation to reduce the corner side yard setback from 30 feet to 9 feet for a detached garage. Is there a motion approved?
Yes,
And a second. Any questions or comments on that?
Are we testing two books on?
We are. That's why we're going to do it in a bifurcated manner. So this is on number one. We have a motion and a second. Any questions on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that is approved. Now I'll entertain a motion to approve number two under that. And that would be the variation to reduce the corner side yard setback from 30 feet to approximately 15 feet to build a roof patio. This was denied by the zoning hearing officer, but I will entertain a motion to approve it as we always do.
So moved.
Second.
A motion to approve and a second. Paul, did you want to give us any basis for the denial?
When the house was built, the corner side yard setback for this property was 15 feet. In the ensuing period, we changed the corner side yard setback to 30 feet. The petitioner demonstrated that the septic field on this property is on the west side of the property and on the south side of the property. So there's no room for the petitioner to add on to his property on the north or west side of his property. While there seems to be a lot of green space on the property, there's really no room to be able to do that and gain good access. The only other place the petitioner could add onto his property for the detached garage would be south of the swimming pool, and that would just mean more concrete and more impervious area on his property. So this is a good location in his mind, and the zoning board of appeals found that the location of the detached garage was acceptable, didn't have any impact on adjacent roadways or properties, and there were no concerns from any of the Township Road Commissioner or any adjacent properties. The zoning board of appeals, I'm sorry, the zoning hearing officer recommended to deny the lean-to because he felt that there was no practical difficulty where the petitioner couldn't move that concrete area further to the west and closer to the pool. However, the petitioner has indicated that he'd like to take advantage of the detached garage as one of the walls to the structure. The same premise applies in terms of no impact on adjacent properties or roadways. The zoning hearing officers felt that there was no real practical difficulty or hardship as to why the petitioner couldn't move it over a little bit further. But the petitioner has indicated and demonstrated that this screened-in lean-to porch that will be associated with the swimming pool and not necessarily the garage is not closer to the property line or closer to the roadway than the garage itself. So really no one who is driving down the road will be able to even see this lean-to area because the garage is in the way. But once again, the ZHO felt that there was no real practical difficulty or hardship that supported the variation for the lean-to.
And then you indicated to me that there would be a concurrent use to some of the concrete that's being used, which would even increase green space.
Correct. That's a good point. To move the concrete area over to an area that would meet the setback area would mean more impervious area on the property and less green space.
Okay. Any questions for Paul? Yes.
Just have a comment, I guess. Thank you, Chair. I would think having to move concrete in order to get an approval through our zoning would be a hardship. From an environmental standpoint, I think that that's kind of crazy. And if this proposal could increase the green, then I would be in favor of approving this as well.
Anyone else?
Yes, so it almost sounds like it's gonna look more like one structure instead of two separate structures, right? Maybe a cleaner look then.
Yes. It's a fair statement.
Okay. Any other questions of Paul? Okay, we have a motion to approve the variation. Roll call, please. So a yes vote would be overturning the CHO's denial.
Member Chaplin. Aye. Member Rutledge.
Aye.
Member Guston. Aye. Chair Tornatori.
Aye. The motion is approved. And the variation is approved. Moving on to item 6D. I'll entertain a motion to approve DCO 22-23, zoning 2265, Alieva. This is a ZHO's recommendation to deny a variation to reduce required lot width from 165 feet to 143.55 feet for lot 2. A motion to approve this variation.
Second.
A motion to approve and a second the variation. Paul, again, I know we've talked about it. Can you give us a little history on the denial by the CHO?
So this is a piece of property that's zoned in the R1 single family residential zoning district. It's our sort of most restrictive single family zoning district. Requires a minimum lot area of 100,000 square feet with a minimum lot width of 165 feet. The property is completely surrounded by properties in the village of Burr Ridge. To the north of the subject property is a townhouse development in Burr Ridge that has a density of about 8.75 dwelling units per acre. Property to the east and the west are properties in the incorporated area of Burr Ridge. The lot sizes are around 40,000 square feet, in some instances even smaller than 40,000 square feet. The proposed development would be to divide the property from one lot into two lots. Both lots would be at least a minimum of 100,000 square feet. So actually well over the minimum 100,000 square foot lot requirement. But one of the lots would have a lot width of 143 feet as opposed to 165. That's about 12% of the requirement. If they were at 10%, they would only need administrative variation. They would not even need to come to this board to be done administratively. The village of Burr Ridge has indicated in a letter an objection, not a resolution objection, but a letter of objection that says that this lot width would not meet the minimum lot requirements for a lot in the zoning district that this would be in Burr Ridge of 200 feet, irrespective of the fact that everything around in Burr Ridge is much smaller and it actually has more density. But nevertheless, that's the village of Burr Ridge requirement. There was some concern from the subdivision to the north, the homeowners association, townhouses to the north, that there was an issue about access. There's access to this property on Garfield Road all the way up to 91st Street. We did some research on it. We found some documents dating back to 1918 that indicates that this property, along with its subsequent properties through division, have the right to access Garfield Avenue through this piece of property. So the subdivision to the north, that was their only concern. The subdivision to the north has essentially dropped any objections they had to the development because they were concerned about access. That's the non-issue anymore because they do have the rights to access Garfield all the way up to 91st Street. There is a neighbor that is just in front of the subject property that has an easement over Garfield Avenue and the subject properties to get to her house. You may have read in the packet that she had some concerns about this being a public utility easement only, not an access easement, when in fact it is an access easement, which she enjoys to be able to get to her property. So that's a non-issue as well. The reason the zoning hearing officer recommended for denial is that he felt that the petitioner didn't, similar to the previous case in terms of the lean-to, didn't present a hardship or practical difficulty as to why they should be able to receive a variation from 165 feet down to 143. The petitioner, although they're not here today, did demonstrate that these particular pieces of property are unique. They're not the typical rectilinear cookie cutter properties that are fronting directly on a public right of way. They are irregular shape. Some are they're not a typical rectangular square, and they are a bit irregular. There is some wetland on the property that's will not impact development, but the way the lots are divided also take into consideration that they didn't want to divide the lots in a way that would bring a property line through the wetland, which in theory they could do. So they wanted to divide it, that kept all the wetland on one property and took into account the regular shaped size of the properties. And in so doing, they suggested that they need a variation from 165 down to 143 for the lot width. Lot areas are still going to be well over 100,000 square feet. But once again, DHO felt that there wasn't a demonstrable hardship or practical difficulty shown by the petitioner. And that's the reason for recommendation to deny.
And the letter from Burr Ridge, again, I don't really understand this, that it wouldn't meet the hardship standard of Burr Ridge, but it's not in Burr Ridge. And then there was a concern that some residents weren't notified of the variation request. Were you able to determine whether that was correct?
Yeah, we reconcile that. What's happening is that when we send out notification, by state law, our notification requires that we notify immediate adjacent properties. For the 30 years I've been here and beyond, we've always notified property owners within 300 feet of the property, well beyond as a policy, well beyond what we're required to under state statute. The reason we do that is the municipal code requires that municipalities send notification to property owners within 250 feet. That's the law. So we felt as a policy for, once again, well over 30 years that we should do a little bit more than what the municipalities are required. So we mail notice to property owners within 300 feet. So we've done that. We verified that with Burr Ridge. We verified that with some of the people that indicated they didn't get notice. The one issue was that there, as I mentioned earlier, immediately to the north, there's a homeowners association and townhouses. And a couple of the people who live in the townhouses were sent notification to their townhouses, but they live in those townhouses part-time. They live somewhere else in the country. And they did not get notice at their residences in either Florida or Arizona where they were residing at the time. The notices were verified that they were sent to their townhouses in Burr Ridge. They verified that the mail was collected by someone that was renting at the townhouse in Burr Ridge, but didn't notify them that they received the documents. So we reconciled it. Everybody is now comfortable that proper notice was secured by the county.
Okay, and my last question was, there was an objection from one of the people here that the developer seeks to build on a designated wetland. That's
When the development to the north was being developed, and that came from someone who lives in the townhouse development, I think it's the vice president of townhouses, that they were acutely aware that there was wetland to the south of their development because there was a little bit of wetland on their development in the incorporated area of Burr Ridge. So they were aware that when they were developing the townhouses, that the larger wetland was on the subject property. And so the feeling was misinformed, but the feeling was that this entire property that we're talking about was wetland, when in fact just the northern portion of the subject property is wetland, and the developer will only be allowed by our codes when they come in for a building permit to build in the areas that are not wetland, which are essentially on the southwest side of the property. The wetland is up in here closer to the townhouse.
so that objection is based on a misunderstanding of the
Misinformation,
lay of the land. Okay. Any questions, Paul? Yes.
So they're looking at R1, not R2 or R, that's what they're looking for, single family R1 redevelopment on the site, or is it R2? I thought I read somewhere where it was gonna be potentially R2.
So the county's nomenclature for residential is R1, 2, 3, and 4, single family residential. Burr Ridge's nomenclature for single family residential is R1 and R2. And so, for instance, it goes reverse in the county. The R1 is the larger lot sizes. The R2 is a larger lot size, meaning minimum 100,000 square feet. R2 in the county is 40,000 square feet. R3 and R4 are much smaller. In Burr Ridge, they start out with R1, which requires essentially a lot that's 40,000 square feet size. In the R2 in Burr Ridge, they require 2 acres of land. So what you may have read is that in the village of Burr Ridge, they would require, if this property were in Burr Ridge, they would require zoning of R2, which is different than R1. And the R2 would require 2 acres, but it would also require a minimum lot width of 200 feet. So that R2 is a Burr Ridge nomenclature, not a county. Having said that, this will remain R1, remain minimum lot size of 100,000 square feet. The only thing you're asking for is to reduce the lot width from 165 to 143.
And then the other, I had a question for staff that I sent in, and I was wondering, there was also a letter in there about the country club utility easement. And is that the easement you're talking about, that don't worry about it, she's going to be able to get access to? Obviously, we can't landlock somebody who owns a home that we can't get to it. But they did talk about this utility easement. I didn't know if that was a drive or something, or if it's just totally non-relevant to.
When they're 2 separate things. A lot of times you will have utility easements that are superimposed over private property or even superimposed on public right of way. In this case, we've got 2 different things. We've got a public right of way that leads to a cross-access easement for access only. Separate and apart from that, on private property is this utility easement. The homeowners association that we're talking about thought that the utility easement and the cross-access easement were the same thing and on the same property. They are not. And just to be clear, if you look at the aerials, you can see that the properties to the south that we're talking about, there's only 2 houses on them. They're total about 6. There's about 7 acres of land total. So a lot of people thought that that was just wasteland. And you look around the developed area, and it's all relatively new within the last 20 years, in some cases the last 10 years. So when people look at these properties to the south, they thought they could never be built on, ever. When in fact, people had property rights, they were just they were a lot larger lots. So the utility easement that the people were talking about when they built the townhouses to the north, they thought that the only thing that was down there to get access to these properties was to bring utilities down here, and there was no access easements. But they are, bottom line, they are 2 completely separate things. And that's been reconciled with the homeowners association again as well.
Thanks.
Question.
Thank you, Dan. It's a process question. I've noticed that at least 6 C, D, E all were approved or denied by the zoning hearing officer rather than the Board of Appeals. And I'm just curious why that is.
So we've got 2 processes that do the exact same thing: the ZHO, zoning hearing officer, and the zoning board of appeals. In order to expedite zoning cases, expedite is not a good word, I'm sorry. In order to get cases on the docket so people can move through and get their entitlement, whether it's yes or no, going through the zoning hearing officer is a quicker process. It allows us to, get cases before public hearing and get some sort of action on those cases. Going to the zoning board of appeals, sometimes it's been difficult during COVID to get people together. Now I know that COVID is through, but it was difficult for people to get together. And even though we could have a public hearing with just 1 zoning board of appeals member, we could not vote without having a full complement or quorum of the ZBA members. In addition, in order for a zoning board of appeals vote to have standing with the development committee and county board, you have to have a favorable recommendation from the zoning board of appeals, and that constitutes at least 4 ZBA members saying yes to something. Sometimes it was difficult to get all the zoning board of appeals members at the meeting, and we would be doing a disservice to the petitioner if we weren't able to get all the ZBA members there. If we got a quorum, that would be fine, but let's say we had 4 board members there, that's a quorum, but 3 voted yes and 1 voted no. that does not constitute a favorable recommendation, so we're doing a disservice to the petitioner. So all things considered, it's been a lot easier to bring cases to the zoning hearing officer to be able to get, be able to move them along, move through the process, get them their entitlement, once again, yes or no, and also get the vote in place as well. That's the reason why we've taken a lot of these to the ZHA.
But now that COVID is over, we're gonna relook at that policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Zoom meeting would not be permissible?
Well, one of the things with the Zoom meeting to vote is that you have to, if you recall, you have to pronounce why you can't attend in person. And that's either through an illness or our meetings are at 6 o'clock at night. Sometimes they're, for the recommendation, they're at 5:30. It's very difficult to say perhaps that I can't make it because I'm sick, or I can't make it because I'm at work at 5:30 in the afternoon. Some of our folks are retired. So that's not a legitimate excuse not to be in public and vote in public.
You need a form of members physically present even to allow somebody to.
Sure, no, I hear all of that. I guess if you're part of the zoning board of appeals and you've been appointed to that position, I guess I'm more comfortable with a board of appeals rather than one individual passing judgment on those. That's just where I'm at.
As the chairman said, we are revisiting that now that people are able to show up in person in theory.
Shit.
Yeah, I just have a quick question on this lot one. It's an odd configuration. We've got like a 26, it's like a 26-foot finger coming off. I'm just wondering why that it's configured that way. Just sure there's a reason.
So when these lots were developed, probably back in the 1918, 1919, well, actually 1918, because that's when the.
So this is the way it is now?
Yeah, what people would do under the Illinois Plat Act is that they assess properties off through assessment or deed rather than formal subdivision. And they divide land off to give to their kids, or they divide it off to keep some homestead exemptions available. So the way they divided land was through deed division and assessment plat. These divisions weren't done through formal review by the county, by a county plat committee. They were just done based on the whims of the people who own the property. So we see a lot of these larger pieces of property divided off in very strange configurations.
So I would think that they would clean up the lines since they're getting this at this point in time. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of Paul? Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve. And vote or yes vote to overturn the CHO's recommendation. Roll call, please.
Member Chaplin? Aye. Member Rutledge?
Aye.
Member Gusting?
Aye.
Chair Torrey?
Aye. And motion carries. Moving on to item 6E, I'll entertain a motion to approve DCO 23-23 as the HO's recommendation to approve conditional use for height and size of multi-tenant sign. Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion second. Any questions, comments on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Any old business? New business? Without objection, we're adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.